The NHS Gloucestershire ICB board meeting. Welcome to anybody that is watching us online. Hopefully you'll be able to hear and see us as we go through, but you're very welcome. I'd like to just start with by welcoming Shane Devlin, who is the Cluster Chief Executive for both Gloucestershire ICB and BNSSG ICB. This is he was confirmed in post after our last public board. So this is the first time he's been able to live.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, thank you. It's a delight, pleasure to be here today, and also a real honour and privilege to be the Chief Executive of both Gloucestershire ICB and Bristol North Somerset and South Gloucestershire ICB as we work our way through this transition process. Obviously, we'll talk a lot more over the coming months in terms of transition and where the organisation is going to. But I think it's really important that the success of Gloucestershire continues, and we have a job on our hands to get to the end of this year, but also to work collectively to get us into what will be a new organisation structure of the NSSG in Gloucestershire, and also work out what strategic commissioning means for us and how the system will work. But today I'm here at the invite of the Chair, and I'm going to continue to attend. Obviously, Sarah remains the Chief Executive in transition, that's why Sarah is dealing with the papers today, and over the next couple of months we'll see the transition into a different organisation, a different cluster, and obviously as we move forward, the board will transition into a new set of rules as well next year. But in the meantime, I'm just delighted to be here, honoured, privileged, and look forward to working with all of you over the coming months, years, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shane. And we'll do our best to manage the microphones as well, because we often, sometimes we give ourselves a score about how well we do. But
yeah.
So if we go into the main meeting, we've got apologies from Anne James, Mark Cook, and we've got Rachel, so very happy to see you again. We've got Dr. Jo Bailey, apologies, Helen Goody, and Graham Russell. Are there any others that I've missed?
Apologies from first.
Thank you. If we move on, declarations of interest. The register of interests are publicly available. We've updated them to include both Shane and Jeff's declarations of interest. Has anybody got any other declarations for this meeting that they need to declare? No? Excellent. Okay. Can we move on to the minutes of the last meeting that was held on the 24th of September? Has anybody got any comments or changes, Jo?
Yeah, there's a couple of errors in 10.3.1. So JCU should be JC.
Yeah,
and I think the second part of the final sentence, which is and approve the procurement policy following the audit committee review, is incorrect and should be removed.
Thank you. Anybody got any other points they want to raise? Okay. So can we take that request away and update the minutes, please? And if that's done, are we happy for them to be signed? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. If you look at the action log, we have got a request. So 39, the first one, that's planned to be included on the agenda for January. So we'll leave that open. And then 48 and 55 have been requested to be closed because one's being linked to the development session and the other one has been included in the integrated performance report paper. Are colleagues happy for us to close those two outstanding actions? Yep. Okay, so we'll close those. Thank you. And the other two are related to development sessions anyway, so we'll pick that up in the development board. If we move on, we've got the next is going into our business items. We've now got questions from members of the public, and we've had 2 questions in and one that was sent anonymously but too late to be included in today's meeting. So I'm going to hand over first to Tracy, I think, for the first of the questions.
Thank you, Chair. So our first question relates to, since September 2023 until the present time, what learning has NHS Gloucestershire ICB with all partners taken, understood and acted upon to have full assurance and reassurance that perceptual and actual declarations of interest and conflict of interest are managed in a robust and transparent way, internally and externally. What action has the ICB and all partners taken in any case that may or have identified that staff may have compromised the actual perceptual interest related to their policies and procedures? So our response to this one is followed. The ICB regularly reviews and updates its standard of business conduct policy, incorporating its conflict of interest policy. The last update to the policy was in September 2025, with the ICB's audit committee approving the changes made to the policy to ensure there is a robust and comprehensive section on secondary employment, as well as minor updates on recent guidance and legislation. The audit committee reports to the board and undertakes an assurance role for the board with regard to the ICB's internal controls. Additionally, the audit committee received the internal audit report in February this year on conflicts of interest, which was undertaken by BDO. Our internal auditors who undertook an assessment of the ICB design and effectiveness of its controls on conflicts of interest and provided substantial assurance related to both categories. The ICB adheres to NHS England statutory guidance on managing conflicts of interest in the NHS. The guidance sets out clear expectations for the identification of actual and perceived conflicts of interest, the publication and maintenance of up-to-date registers, and the active management of any conflicts or potential conflicts through appropriate mitigation and, where necessary, exclusion from decision-making processes. These requirements apply across all sectors, including our NHS providers, local authority and statutory agencies involved in partnership work, including BCSE representatives and delivery partners. I'm now going to hand over to Gemma, who's going to be part two.
Tracy. The second question is, what assurance and reassurance does the NHS Gloucestershire Integrated Care Board with all partners have that the National Association of Voluntary and Community Action, NAVCA, has undertaken service that is valued for public money and of a quality that is expected when allocating public resources? What assurance and reassurance does NHS Gloucestershire with all partners have that actual and perceptual declarations of interests have been identified and robustly managed when undertaking the whole process to identify a draft report that has been discussed with the voluntary and community sector? Within our longer response, which will be available to everybody to see, we have given a description of NAVCA, which I won't go through in detail now. NAVCA have been funded to carry out a defined piece of work to engage with our local BCSE sector to assess what infrastructure and capacity building support is needed in the future. As with all activity funded by NHS Gloucestershire ICB, we had put in place clear expectations, oversight arrangements and quality standards to ensure the work represents good value for public money. Throughout the process, NAVCA have been required to provide regular progress updates, including how they have engaged with local organisations through workshops, surveys and joint sessions with local partners. These reports are reviewed by ICB officers against the agreed expectations. In addition, the ICB has maintained close contact with local partners to ensure the work reflects local experiences and offers an accurate picture of the sector's needs. NAVCA's outputs will be assessed at the end of this activity period against the original brief, and the learning will inform the design of any future investment. On this basis, the ICB has assured that appropriate governance, monitoring and quality controls are in place, and that the work delivered by NAVCA represents responsible use of public money.
Thank you, Jim. So as Jane indicated, there was a third set of questions raising concerns about recruitment practices within one of our providers. Unfortunately, this question was not received in time in line with our agreed protocol of 5 calendar days or 3 working days. We will follow the matter up with the provider and we'll publish a response online, but it's probably, it will be for the provider really to respond to the issues raised. Thank you. Thanks, Tracy. Okay, the next item is for our 10-year delivery plan and public engagement. And you will have seen through the board papers that there was a really comprehensive outline of how we're doing that, and some questions that you're asking. Becky is going to present to us on that public engagement session. We're doing that instead of our normal patient
story, because obviously this is going on a lot of the people who use our services. So I'm going to make it. Great, thank you very much, Jane. And thank you very much for giving us time today to give you an update on how the public engagement is going. Just a health warning at the beginning, we'll be going for a week. So I am going to share some feedback with you, but please bear in mind it's just really initial feedback that we've had. So I have put together a very short presentation. As I say again, we're only going for a week, so I did it really quickly this morning. We ran some reports for you late last night. So Ryan, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you.
Thanks, just sharing.
So we have we've launched an engagement called Getting Ready for the Future Now. This is being distributed across the county. Colleagues are busily sending out booklets to libraries, family hubs, GP practices, community hospitals, etc. We're taking it out and about across the county, encouraging people to give us their feedback. Inside this booklet, there is a pre-post survey for people who don't like to do this online, and we've already got surveys started. But a lot of people are starting to ask surveys. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So we've called the engagement now, NOW. What we tried to do was try and find a way to make it feel a little bit exciting and a bit sort of present for people who live in the county. We took the 3 shifts from the 10-year plan and we kind of recrafted them to, I don't know, to help them to make sense to people. So our N is neighbourhood health and care, our O is online digital and technology, and our W is wellbeing, prevention and maintaining health independence. The last one, the W, is particularly important because we wanted to make sure that it didn't feel too NHS health focused. We wanted to make sure it felt more about a sort of wider determinants of health. So that was very helpful feedback we got from colleagues in the local authority to help us convert that one. We're asking people about a set of principles that we actually co-designed with the population about a decade ago. We want to check in with them, see whether those are still relevant today. Do they still matter? Are they still the things that are important to people? And we want to try and find out what people's priorities are for today as well. So we've got, it's quite a long sort of series of questions that we're asking people. And as I say, people are really engaging with it and we are starting to get quite a lot of detailed feedback in. All the feedback we get will help us to develop our 5-year plan. And we'll be doing regular interim reports to colleagues who are working on that system between now and the end of the engagement period. Next slide, please. So, for those of you who are really familiar with the Gloucestershire setup for engagement, you'll recognise the picture of our information bus on a slightly sunnier day than it's had to endure for the last couple of days when we've been out and about doing this engagement. We have launched our online participation page project at Get Involved in Gloucestershire. The link is in the presentation, which I'm sure we'll be able to send out to you after the meeting. As I say, there's an online survey, we have a print survey, and people can get in touch with us and answer it in different formats if they would like to. We haven't had any inquiries yet, but we're always ready and able to do easy read or any other different languages, or happy to work with people over the telephone if they prefer to give us that feedback in that way. So we're out and about, both on the engagement bus, but also in community venues, and I've got a list of those on the next slide. And we are doing targeted engagement with some of the underserved communities who don't often necessarily choose to engage with some of the more traditional methods, so filling in surveys, for instance. So our insight manager, who's got particular responsibility for equity, inclusion and diversity, she's taking out questions to the groups that she's working with on a regular basis. We're showing groups like our patient participation group network, etc., etc. So we're getting good coverage. Deadline, as you can see here, is the 11th of January. We extended the period just a bit, just to give people a little bit of extra time after the Christmas and New Year holidays. And we will be running reports, as I say, interim reports, as and when we're requiring them for the various submissions that we want to make. Next one, Thank you. I won't go through all of these. These are the scheduled events that we have. As you can see, it's a mix of bus, health service venues and libraries. Thank you to Siobhan in particular for introducing me to the new lady. She's not like she's been for about a year, but the new lady who leads on library work in the county. She's been incredibly helpful. Really good connection. We will be making really good use of libraries going forward. I think I'm down to go to the first library in Berkeley next week, which is a community-led library. They've always been in touch. And in fact, there will be cake, so I'm very excited about that. The good thing about cake is that we'll draw people from the local community as well. So I'm really confident that prices coming in. So next slide, please. Just put this slide up, just to let people know that we are paying attention to some of the key stakeholders as well as part of this engagement. So we have scheduled discussions with the Health Local Treatment Committee in Gloucestershire over the next 3 meetings. And we started in November, didn't Sarah, with a focus on neighbourhood health. And thank you to Emma, who came along to talk about the GP cooperative. And we had a really good, useful discussion. We will be going for a focus on online and digital in January, and I'm really delighted that we're actually going to be going to the joint meeting of HOSC and the Adult Social Care Screening Committee in March to talk about wellbeing, which I think that's really nice with some of the other work that colleagues across the system are taking forward in that way. Really nearly there. I'll give you some highlights from what we've heard so far. Next slide, please, Van. As I mentioned before, we're doing lots of awareness raising. We've already completed 4 bus visits. I spent yesterday a few hours in the atrium at the Shire hospital chatting to people who were busy going past me to SDEC and going to the outpatient departments, etc. We've launched our people's panel survey. As of this morning, we've had 34 responses. For those of you who are perhaps not familiar, the people's panel is our representative sample of people who live in the county. It's approximately 1,000 residents. Good age ranges, good range of disability, genders, etc., etc. We only launched that survey just a couple of days ago, and we've already had 34 in. Our public survey, we've had 82 responses as of this morning, but I'm going to share with you results from last night where we've had 69. So that's where the discrepancy is in numbers. Everybody's wondering why I'm talking about 69 responses shortly. But a good initial response rate. I'm really very happy about that. Right, going to give you some feedback now. I'm not going to read out all of these quotes, and I have selected these very quickly. Please don't assume that these are absolutely representative of everything we've heard, but I want to pick out some of the highlights of things that we've heard. These are from the bus visits that we've done so far, from Dursley and from Cirencester. As you can see, if you're reading on the screen behind me, there's quite a lot of focus on services in communities and travel to different places. There's quite a lot of, in this one as well, feedback about prevention. Really nice to hear from a younger person as well about, I'll be on the next slide, apologies, but just to give you a feel for the things that are on people's minds when we're asking them about their priorities for the future. And there's some practical stuff. We always get feedback about car parking and transport and that kind of thing, but I just want to include that so you can see we're hearing some of the things that we often hear, but we're starting to hear some things that are a little bit different as well, and that may be to do with the way that we're framing the conversation with people. Next slide. So here's more. These are all from Cirencester. We were busy in Cirencester and on the day yesterday. As you'll be aware, we've got some temporary tests to change at Cirencester Hospital at the moment, and I think that's brought out a few more people to come and talk to us. People making comments again about having to travel, particularly older people. This is the one about the young person. I absolutely love this. I love it when people say that they want people to listen to them. Obviously, that's my bread and butter. I'm out there trying to listen to people. But it's really interesting that there's an individual here who really wants their clinical team to listen to them and what's important to them. And I also love it that they're saying the NHS, they love the NHS, which also makes my heart sing, even when there's some criticism within the comments that we're getting. Some very specific things about physio, etc. And there will be more. As I say, we only started this last week. It's only responses from 69 people. So, sorry, these aren't survey responses, these are people talking to us. We've only just started this journey and this engagement, but you'll see people are really starting to engage with it. Next slide, please. So, I haven't been able to do any analysis of the qualitative feedback we've had from the surveys yet, but I thought I'd share with you some of the quantitative results that we've had so far. You'll remember a little while ago I mentioned that we wanted to ask people about the principles that we co-designed with them a few years ago. These are they, these principles here. So a greater amount of budget should be spent on supporting people to take more control of their health. That is something that's guided us through the last decade. In terms of the feedback we get from most people who strongly agree is sitting at around 89%. It was about 72% last time around, so it's still in the high percentages of people who agree that that's the principle. Another one which has gone up is there should be a greater focus on prevention and self-care. That's now sitting at 95%. It was 88% of people who agreed that that was the principle. The others are pretty much the same. Again, health warning, this is only based on 69 responses, but it looks like the principles that we developed 10 years ago are holding pretty strong in terms of this first week's feedback, which is helpful and useful. Next one, please. Okay. This is obviously it's a really long question, and there's just a little bit of data. We think services and support people use most frequently should be available as close to where they live as possible, and we think it's reasonable for people to travel if it's something that's more rare. This is a new question that we're asking. We've spent a lot of time developing that question, trying to get it right, trying to find out how comfortable people are about travelling when they don't have to do it very often. As you can see, we've got a really 75% of people so far agree with that statement, which is potentially very helpful going forward if that's how it continues to be as we collect more feedback. Next one. And good news is I'm not going through all the survey questions, by the way, I only come want picked out for you. This is a question about seeing a specialist and what's important. Now, the reason I put this one in is because this was a very helpful question that we asked people 10 years ago. It helped very much with the development of some of our service reconfiguration proposals over the last couple of years. It's really helpful to know that that the expertise of the specialist is the thing that's the most important to people, and that waiting times and that kind of thing are important. But things like distance to travel are less important to people when it's about that specialist service that they're going to access. So this is very much linked to that last question that I shared with you. Just so you know, the top two things so far in this first week are exactly the same as they were last year, 10 years ago. So the most important thing is the expertise of specialists. It was then, it is now, and the time I have to wait for my appointment was then. The second most important thing is the same now. I don't suspect people are particularly surprised about that necessarily, but it's useful to have that reinforcement. Again, that health warning is only a week's long date. Next slide, please. And then this is that urgent help. So this isn't necessarily about the 999 ambulance. This is about if you need some support urgently for something. And again, very similarly, the top three things are exactly the same as they were last time around. And so the most important thing is prompt assessment decision making, followed by ability access services 7 days a week, followed by service staff with the specialist. It's the same top three it's talking about. And we have added in I don't think we've got any new ones in yet. No, we didn't add new options for people to choose from on this particular question. Just to say, we are modifying the questions for 2025 in some cases in the survey. They're not all the same as we asked in 2025. Next, please. Now, what I haven't done is I haven't focused on all areas of now. I've just picked out the online digital and technology quantitative questions to share the results for you here. We asked people about what prevents them from using digital technology in day-to-day activities. And safety, security is coming out really strongly, and people wanting to do things face-to-face. And that next, please, that's quite measured mirrors in the next question as well. Concerns about using digital technologies to help and manage their family. We allow people to choose up to three things that are most relevant to them. Again, lack of personal contact was a concern for people. confidence that the information will be used appropriately and that appropriate action will be taken, and knowing how the information is being shared and used. Now, these are all really helpful things for us to understand because it helps us with our sort of development of services, online, digital, etc. going forward. Again, good say again, the health warning, this is literally the first week's feedback we're getting here. But as you can see, we're starting to get some front runners in terms of the things that people have got concerns about or are anxious about. And then the last slide, you won't be able to see this very well, but we've asked people, this again is about the online digital and technology section of the booklet. We've asked people to describe it in 3 words. The things that are important to them about digital online and technology. Just a quick look at this. The words that are jumping out to me are secure, easy, and personal. These are the things that people are telling us are important to them. We will do work out for all of the other 2, so for neighbourhoods and for the wellbeing section. They're just quite a good way to get a flavour for the things that we want to do. It also might help us in terms of how we describe these sort of shifts that we want to make. We've had a lot of debates about what does neighbourhood mean. Maybe when we look at the neighbourhood questions around it, they might give some words which can help us describe it to people so they know what we're talking about and we'll know what we're talking about as well. So that is my last slide. And I'm very happy to take questions. It was a gallop through, and this is so lost to the press, I can't tell you, I can then hold the paper. So, and we continue. My guys are out at the moment, they're in, where are they today? In Stroud today, tomorrow we're in Cheltenham and Link College, all going to Cheltenham General Hospital tomorrow, and we're going to be out and about keeping the Polish community today. So we are literally back all over the place this Thank you.
Thank you, Becky, and it's great to see the early findings. So, yeah, really good. Can I just check the name? Yes, Joe.
Was open before I was going to ask something.
Yeah.
It's really nice and interesting to see. The questionnaire is really quite long, it is. And so obviously if people are filling it in the booklet, they can send it to you if they partially completed. For the online completion, do you have a way that people can exit so that you can still get the data from the early parts of the completion rather than they just drop out? I just wonder if you put something like that in place.
Brilliant question, and thank you very much for asking it. Yes, we can. So we have a message at the beginning of the survey, which says to people, you might be interested in all of this, just answer the questions you're interested in. So people can go straight to digital if that's something they're interested in. We also put a message which says, if you haven't got time to do this all in one go, you can exit, it will be saved, you can come back in again. If people just give up halfway through, that's also fine. Where they've got to, the data is saved, we can do it's called a partial closure. We can close it and we can cut the data from the first half of the survey or whichever bit of the survey decides to do. We don't do the forced closures until right at the end, just in case somebody starts it on a Monday and has to come back to it until after Christmas. We won't close the partials until the end of January, that sort of thing. So, yeah, good question. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. Jeff, I'm the new chair here and the chair of the NSSG. I would probably have some questions to Joe about methodology, because our methodology is critical. Otherwise, don't target the community, we target elements of the community. Brilliant. I think the more we're talking to people, the more we're consulting, the more we get an evidence space, makes us make better commissioning decisions. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is on the analysis. You're right, it's probably a bit early, so the amount of data that we've got there. But how are we able to cut that data? So, we may have a lot of people my age who are white responding to the survey, but can we cut it by age and race? And is that going to come back in this information for us? That's the first one. But the second one is, how will this inform our decision making? How are we going to use this evidence to inform us? So as the chair making strategic commissioning decisions, I want to rely on things like this to be able to say this is what the public telling us. So it needs to be a strong evidence base. So my question is that channeled through a committee and it comes back into the board, or the board expected to plough through that, or what happens there? And then the final one on the timescales you got on there, we're well into the new year. And we do anticipate well into the new year, we're going to be one organisation. So I suppose it's not a question for you, it might be one for Sarah and for Shane about consistency. Because we can't consult the public in one way, in one area, and then do it a completely different way in another area, and rely on the data to make commissioning decisions. So we have to have that consistency there in the way we're doing it. So a lot in there, but thank you. It was a really good presentation and great to see you out there talking to people.
So I'll do my best to answer the three questions. I'll do the first one first, which was to do with the demographic information. So for anybody who completes one of the surveys, either online or the first part of it is a section called About You. So we can get age, we can get gender, we can get people with disability, we can get ethnicity. We ask people for the first part of their postcode, so that we've got an idea if we're hearing from enough people from the Forest of Dean, Shrewsbury, Cotswolds, etc. We also ask people about what else do we ask them? We ask people whether they're a carer, and we ask people about their overall health as well. It's really helpful for us to know if we're hearing from people who are generally healthy like myself, or whether we're hearing from people who are big users of the service. So yeah, we've got 5 sources of demographic information. And then we can run reports, for instance, say just from the men or whoever, whatever is useful for you, we can run reports for you. In terms of the governance, what we will do once we get to the 11th of January, when the engagement closes, we will run a report, and we will prepare what we call an output engagement report, and that will be shared with a number of groups within the organisational governance structure. So I'm thinking of strategic executive, portfolio design group, etc. Absolutely, it becomes board. It would go to the health and recruitment committee. So there will be a number of people. It will also be made available in the domain. So on Get Involved in the Gloucestershire platform, we always produce, publish the output engagement reports there, and we always publish all of the data as well. So all of the raw survey data, once it's been redacted to make sure there's no personally identifiable information, we also put that there. Because what we want people to do is we want, if anyone wants to take the time to do it, if they look to the data and they look at our thematic analysis of the data, we don't feel comfortable that we have done a true job. Have we done it justice? We come at it from an entirely neutral position in terms of doing thematic analysis. We have started to trial using Copilot to assist us. However, I'm a healthy skeptic, and we always read everything to make sure. So where we ask Copilot to theme something, we will also read it ourselves to check to make sure that we're comfortable that the themes are accurate. And if there's something missing or something has been overemphasised, then we will adapt it. Okay. And then with respect to what we're going to do when we're one big cluster, very happy to have conversations about how we might do that. Obviously, at the moment, we're supporting some customised survey work with respect to staff survey. There's no reason if we wanted to, we could replicate this with different geography. There may be some modifications we want to make, but that would be a relatively straightforward thing to do. And we could work with colleagues in the NSSG around some community engagement. But yeah, that's the conversation that's happening.
Yes, so just to pick up that question a little bit further, and I will cover that a bit more in terms of meetings and handwork. What we are doing this year is we've been asked to produce a strategic commissioning plan for each statutory organisation, so one for the NHS and one for Gloucestershire. We are trying to do that so that there is we've agreed some shared principles and that sort of thing, but we are also starting from where both are. So obviously, like you're very well aware of the work that went on with Office 2040 and the NHS, and this will report in terms of that first part of the strategic commissioning cycle. What Becky's been describing is that will support the understanding of the population alongside the sort of analytics data as well. So, but over time, the expectation is, and as we move into next year, that we'll start doing much more consistently. But for this thing, it's something like that.
Thank you. So, Joe. Sorry, I just wanted to come back on the co-use of Copilot. I'm just wondering, do you tell people who are responding to the survey that you are going to use AI and put their data into AI? I think there's an issue possibly that we're not telling people.
So I'm going to go back and check, see exactly what it is that we're saying. We've been really clear for the last couple of times, so that's what we do. But I just want to go back and check the words. That's really helpful. Thank you so much. Anybody else got any questions?
Thank you very much.
Okay, can we move on to the chief executive report? So hand over to Sarah. Thank you. So yeah, so there's three things that I just did want to bring out this month. First of all, obviously on the ICB reset, and we've heard a little bit from Shane, but I just did think it was important just to highlight that there has been some significant movement this time, so it's probably just worth the board being aware of all of that. So the executive consultation launched last week, and also the voluntary redundancy scheme was signed off nationally by NHS England. So we're just working through to finalise that before it will be launched in the organisation. Huge emphasis at the moment on the medium-term planning. Over the last sort of couple of months, there's been a lot of publication of various bits of guidance to go with that. So the medium-term planning framework, also allocations have now been published for the next 2 years and 4 years for capital, so revenue for 2 years. As we've described, the strategic commissioning framework, which is also highlighted in here, is sort of the cycle that we're expected to go through. We are now, as part of the planning sort of products that we have to produce for the ICB, it's a strategic commissioning plan that we are working towards, which really draws out that understanding of our population and then what we're proposing we do in terms of shifting our commissioning moving forwards. And the input that Becky's just described is going to be a really key part of that in terms of shaping the how we develop our services moving forwards. So the first submission of the medium-term plan is due in December. We are working, there's quite different responsibilities this year in terms of the planning process, with sort of very clear delineation between what's required from providers and what's required from the ICB. What we're very keen to do in the system, and both in Gloucestershire and in the NSSG, is to make sure that that absolutely is coordinated, because it doesn't need to all hang together. We had our first planning day last week in Gloucestershire, and some really good discussion and developments coming through that. So we will be bringing that obviously back to the board in January for sign off the final submission in February. So and then the only other thing I just wanted to highlight was just the change in the maternity services in terms of the restriction of pay births, which I just thought it's important for the board to note. Obviously, working very closely with the trust, but completely understand the rationale for the decision that's been taken.
Karen, is there anything you wanted to add to the maternity things from the further information from the board?
Just a couple of points, please. In the reports, as it's written now, I think it's important to emphasise that our response to the issues of temporary closure was as a result of concerns raised by staff, and they're raised openly. So I'm really grateful for them to be able to do that, and for us to be able to have a conversation, get into the detail of the concerns. One of the other things, it's not referenced in the report, but was relevant to our decision making, was around the same time there was an inquest in Manchester with the death of a baby during a home birth, and there was lots of learning. There was National Prevention of Future Deaths that's coming to upon office there, and that highlights a number of things that I think is important for us to pause and pay particular attention to. Fortunately, we haven't had any of those safety incidents, but it was a precautionary measure. We've done a detailed risk assessment now, and that's why we're probably looking at least 6 months to address those issues more fully, but we'll pick them up more broadly as part of the health needs assessment, which is going to be really important to us in terms of how deliver the services across Gloucestershire going forward. and we anticipate that will be out there in the spring. So we're working closely with the ICB on that. The other thing I think it's worth mentioning, it is a very busy time for the service. Next week we have the maternity safety support programme coming to visit at the start of the week, and at the end of the week we have the national maternity review, who will be spending 2 to 3 days in the service, patient panels, staff panels, speaking to clinical leadership and trust leadership, and that trusts involved in that review. We expect a report out in the spring. And alongside all of that, we're still waiting for the outputs of this recent CQC inspection as well. So it's a very, very busy space beyond just normal operational challenges for the service. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Has anybody got any questions for Simon?
Sorry, just under the ICB reset element, I just wanted to highlight that for completeness, the terms of reference of the transition committee on the plan. They have now been updated following discussion at the committee, so the membership has been amended to include a clinical reference.
Thank you very much. Anybody? Yeah.
To mention those terms of reference, Sarah's just to me to want to raise a couple of things. One is, I know we talked about membership before, and the possibility of including as a non-voting member a colleague who is representing the interests of primary care. In recognition that the 10-year plan is all about development of neighbourhood health. So that's not just about GPs, but they are key partners in this. So I don't know whether the committee discussed it when it met, but I'm interested in colleagues' reflections on that. And the second thing, which is very linked, is when we talk about the operating model for the new ICB, I can see a lot of that is about structures and, you know, how all that comes together in an organisational sense. I'm less clear about how much it's going to look at the kind of operating principles around commissioning and so on, whether that's something for later. I'm not quite sure about timescales and learning detail, in other words.
I've said with part of Michelle answer, I was going to say we'll probably put a lot of that up in the commission update and change.
Yeah, so in terms of primary care representation, what's important is that we've established 8 work streams, okay? Because that's where the discussion about not the structure of an organisation, but the operating framework and how work gets done. Structure is merely a wireframe, and work gets done between that wireframe, not in it. Okay? So what we're looking at is 8 work streams, one about strategic commissioning, one about finance, and actually what we will have, we inviting lots of people to participate in those as we're getting the designing the new framework. In terms of the committee didn't discuss and agree in terms of primary care representative. I don't believe. I'm more than happy that we can suggest the chair we can discuss that. What we did discuss was having clinic representation for chief, so 2 chief medical officers, 2 nurses, chief nursing officers discussed it, and the nomination was Dr. Joe Meadows from the Institute. Joe is a GP by background, but that was the agreement with Joe. Having that discussion, whatever, and it's not in the problem there, but more than happy to discuss primary care representation. Certainly, but the other thing, it is a timing thing for me. So once we start to look at the structure, getting the wireframe, we absolutely get into operating framework conversation. That cannot be an ICB conversation, it is an ICS conversation. It has to be processes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've changed part of the conversation as well. We recently met with GP collaboratives, both Gloucestershire and from the NSSG, which was a really productive meeting. And we sort of signalled in that the responsibilities and the intent that we have around primary care and where that fits going forward. I think that started the ball rolling between general practice and primary care in Gloucestershire and in the NSSG. And it was a very positive conversation. What I think started as a suggestion of NLS very quickly came into we're all in this together and looking for the same opportunities. And I came away from viewing it now, but I came away from that house and was positive conversation. And so that was all that links in also the Shane was talking about how we are making sure those conversations take place.
Thank you. Karen, what's going on?
Hi, not a question, just a statement. And if I can just go back to maternity, where I know a number of us have been asking questions and wanting updates about progress on maternity. I just thought it was appropriate to commend Kevin and his team for taking what I would say is a brave decision on maternity and pausing home births. Given particularly the amount of media attention I'm sure you knew it would attract, and it has attracted. I think for me it signalled it signalled something really meaningful, and I'm sure that your midwives in particular were very grateful that they were listened to. So I just felt it was appropriate to say thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I think we would definitely echo that. So it's really helpful for people, for staff to know that when they speak, they're listened to and action is taken. It's really good to be able to reinforce that. We often say it, but it's really good to demonstrate that we actually do that too. So thank you. Okay, if there's no other questions, can we move on to our integrated finance performance policy and workforce report? I'll hand over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So you have the November performance report in your pack. As Chair said at the start of the meeting, the emphasis on performance absolutely continues. Our commitment to strong performance within the county continues. So I'm going to pull out some of the key performance headlines against the national standards. And as usual, just an update on workforce review on quality. And I suggest we pause for questions there, Chair, before Kath takes us through the finance update. So before I just pull out some of the key headlines from the report, just to confirm that as part of the planning process that Sarah referred to earlier, work is well underway with all our key providers to identify and agree how we have got strong ends to the current year, but also how we meet the key target commitments for the coming year in response to the national planning guidance, and that was part of the discussions that took place in the planning day last week and continues. As colleagues are aware, the national focus continues to be on key elective and urgent and emergency care standards. That's not to say that's the entirety of our focus, but we do recognise the national priority placed upon those standards, and we meet every week along with provider colleagues to update NHS England on our progress at a fairly granular level of detail at this point of the year. So just to say a few things about the key achievements since last time. So set out in the report, we are making progress now in terms of working with Gloucestershire hospitals to reduce waits for echocardiography. And indeed, as additional capacity has come on stream this month, so we started to see those waits reduce. It will take some time to really eat into that backlog, but that additional capacity is now there. And there's some further work also taking place around some of those the longer term solutions, including substantive improvements within that service as we relieve some of that pressure through those short term actions. Other things to highlight since last time, so patients reaching 12 hours in ED has reduced again significantly in October, as set out within the report, and that we perform well compared to national benchmarks there. We continue to have pressure around ED for our performance, and that remains a focus. That's going up, if you like, the national agenda. So as some of as we all demonstrate, and systems across the country demonstrate progress against some of the other urgent care metrics, that one feels like one we really do need to work together to make some further inroads on. As set out with the report, long waits within elective care continue to reduce, and we continue to perform really well as a system, and notably GHMT as a provider, not just within the southwest, but nationally in terms of the low level of long waits for elective care. But we're all conscious that all of the numbers in the reports represent individual patients, families, carers who are concerned about waiting for treatment. So that's really really good progress. Linked to that, in terms of the areas of focus set out within the report, so obviously the 5-day latest round of industrial action by resident doctors ended last week. And again, strong performance within Gloucestershire hospitals to mitigate the impact of that with very low elective cancellations, and indeed strong performance within the southwest. Rachel's very much aware that southwest, the highest performing system in terms of the lowest reported levels of elective cancellations within the country. So we should all be proud of that, and colleagues worked hard across the system to support that response. Other areas of focus, we pulled out just a bit more analysis within the report around primary care activity, and particularly showing that GP appointments continue to be significantly above planned levels. So you'll see the analysis, slides 14 to 18 within your pack, and I should say there's a correction there on page 80 of the report. We talk about the chart is labelled as primary care appointments. Those are general practice appointments, just to clarify. So you'll see that significantly up, and we know that we're seeing a significant impact of patients with long-term conditions driving most of that additional activity, in particular diabetes patients, but also some of the other long-term conditions. So a major area of focus within the medium-term plan, indeed within our commissioning intentions, is around how we respond to that pressure within primary care, how we understand the pressure, but also respond to it within the plan. A couple of other areas from me. So a lot of focus, of course, continues to be on cancer performance. And you'll see within the report the latest position in terms of 62-day cancer performance, which is hovering just over 77% in Gloucestershire. So performance is stable, but we still have more to do in terms of bringing down those weights, and a lot of work taking place in terms of improvements within those timed pathways, and redesign work, as well as addressing some of the diagnostic delays within those pathways. And then finally from me, we've just highlighted the weights for community speech and language therapy. So we have seen an increase in waiting times for speech and language, and we are concerned about the impact that's having. So again, a lot of work taking place to address those waits and bring those down. Chair, if I hand over to Tracy, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So I'll take the report largely as read. There's just two things to highlight to board members. So we have been working closely with the local authority on the local Get Bristol working plan. So that's a plan between ICB, local authority, and the Department for Work and Pensions on how we meet the government's aim of getting an 80% employment rate within the next decade. As part of that, you'll see on page 96 of your pack, we've highlighted before that we are one of 10 demonstrator sites nationally working across the UK to get young people back into pre-employment programmes, into substantive entry-level roles, and into training posts, with a local target of us achieving that for 100 people by March of this year. And on page 96 of your pack, you'll see that we're making good progress on that. We've partnered locally with the King's Trust, obviously formerly the Prince's Trust. You'll also see that we are working to develop a nurse cadet programme. And there are plenty of young people out there who are looking for careers in health and care. You'll also see the challenge which I've raised before in relation to Current vacancy controls are limiting pathways for into entry-level roles through the health sector. So that means something positive for our social care colleagues and indeed for sort of primary care roles, and that we are focusing those pipeline pathways in those areas instead, because that there seems to be more opportunities in those areas right now. But good, making really good steady progress on the Winding Access Demonstrator project, and we expect that it might well be extended into the next financial year. Thank you. I'm handing over to Lee. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you, Tracy. Thanks, Chair. Apologies, I'm not in the room. I just will run through just 2 or 3 things that I just wanted to highlight. So the first one was a shout out to all colleagues across the system that have helped develop the new lower limb wound management, care and management. Absolutely fantastic piece of work for those people who've got lower limb wounds. This absolutely affects and improves their lives. So it's something that kind of is under the radar really, unless you're absolutely involved in this work, but it's now in line with the national lower limb wound strategy, and it will make a huge impact in people's lives. So great quality improvement and impact for people, but also lots of potential cost savings there as we move forward. We have noted about the maternity neonatal voices partnership. So we've had a vacancy for a strategic lead for quite some months now. We're probably getting on for 10 months or so. We've now appointed to that role, which is really great, and we've partnered with a local organisation to deliver that service, which will be truly independent, which is brilliant. It was also one of the absolute mandated requirements under the maternity safety support programme, which Kevin mentioned yesterday, and we have got a reset meeting on Monday, so I won't talk through any more about that. In terms of PSIIs, what we've seen in September and October, 3 new PSIIs that have been opened. So there's a patient safety incident investigations. 4 new ones, 3 have been within the acute setting, which are all related to maternity, and 1 in mental health. What I plan to do at the end of the year is the role of the ICB is really not to look at each one in turn, but to make sure we've got assurance about investigations, but also look across the themes of those. And is there anything across the system that we can see that are sort of themes that we can then pull together and see where we need to make improvements? And hopefully then bring that into the whole portfolio work around improving quality across the system and patient experience. There's something in the update around cross-border work, and I just wanted to mention, it's not actually explicit there, that we've had some concerns raised about maternity services across the border where Gloucester residents can't access, so particularly in Warwickshire and in Oxfordshire. We have picked that up with the region, and we have got a statement around that we've produced. They've stopped taking those referrals purely around capacity and safety in their own organisation, so that's the reason there. Lastly, I just wanted to mention pod services. There's been major concerns raised about a national provider, and there's been lots of meetings with our pod colleagues around the EMS, especially within Gloucestershire. That's all being managed through our Southwest collaborating hub in NHS England. So we're just aware that we are absolutely involved in that work, but it's been managed through NHS England. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, all 3 of you. So at this point, we'll just open up for questions for either Mark or Marie or for Tracy. So has anybody got them? Yes, Kevin.
Just a couple of comments on performance, and I guess probably picking up a little bit on the overall framework that's right. We've made positive progress in the nominal rates as being deep since around 12 hours. Obviously flow through the hospital over the course of the past 12 months. But then I think we just need to be quite cautious of, and I'm reflecting on the conversation that we've been having with you colleagues in the past few weeks. Is there a sense that because we've made some really good progress on eliminating boarding on for reduced ambulance and ambulance as well, we think we're missing, we're not cited on the level of risk when the department's very busy, so the corridor of the department. So it's just a rounding view of that. it is a conversation that we're picking up, myself, Douglas, Sarah, and John Martin at SWAS, because that does feature as part of some of the additional actions that we should all be taking as a system alongside the. I just wanted to make sure that that bit wasn't lost from our perspective. The other bit that I think is that will be worthy of a conversation at some point through ICS meetings will be the stock take post industrial action, whether the industrial action ever comes to an end, but we've got so much learning there that's come out of this about what works and what doesn't. Every organisation is talking about something similar. I do think it's focused in mind a bit about as the next phase of our clinical strategy, what does senior clinical decision making look like 24 hours a day? And so I think that would be worthy of a particular conversation. Very good things. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think it would be, there's a lot of learning that we can get from that. Shane, do you want to?
I think it's important to just, we're also having that, the NSU also having that conversation, because it's very clear that performance is very well managed during the industrial action, but there is huge learning as to why performance is what it was in a period of industrial action. So it would be really good to connect maybe that learning piece together between the three hospitals in the NHG and Gloucestershire, just to explore that.
Can we take that away as an action? That we actually will do that across the wider cluster, because I think it's a good opportunity to start sharing information and learning. Right.
We are doing this at a much wider level. That's what we're actually doing this and trying to understand the ability to provide the service as well as the maintenance training and make this related regionally. So I'm going to contribute to that. We are writing a paper that we put to the ICB journal on this very thing. But it is about understanding what we do for the population and have half an eye on what the future training and our future local looks like and getting that balance right. But what's eloquently about it, but we will come back to.
Rachel? I just wondered if there could be some comment around diagnostics performance in the system, because it is deteriorating and flagging for us regionally, which is which I suppose is just about paying attention to that particular endoscopy, and also as still commissioner of screening services, it's also flagging as well. So there's that in conventional diagnostic ends, which are just slightly, well, I'm curious about in terms of just the work that's being done to pay as much attention to that as in the other areas, which I'm
Remarkable. You go first, and then I'll have to thank you.
Kevin, I said the same thing. So the you're absolutely right, Rachel. So endoscopy and echocardiography are the two big areas that we're concerned about. So as I mentioned, good progress in terms of the additional echoes capacity coming on. Obviously, big numbers, much bigger numbers within endoscopy. We've put additional investments in this year into the trust. There's big challenges, of course, in terms of that workforce. Enormous amount of work taking place in the trust to address those. So we've still some way to go really to that capacity really to feed in and those weights to come down.
I think so. We had a long conversation about this earlier this week. So it is receiving the same level of attention. I know there's the regional sort of interface as well that we plug into. I think endoscopy is a particular challenge, and one of the things that we are keen to resolve through this next contracting round is that we intended to use the non-recurrent method to support service, we support service year on year. I think we want to have a longer term view on that, because that has limited our ability sometimes to be able to get the right staffing in on the long term, etc. So that is something that we are picking up as part of my conversations that the system has definitely got visibility around that. Well, in terms of breast screening, slightly different in terms of some of the challenges. I think there is just a volume challenge there. We've also, one of the things that has compounded our efficiency in that service is we've had a competitive picture archive and communication system that's been very fragile when we're changing what's been in there. What that has meant is that there's been a significant amount of downtime. So that's compounded workforce issues. And we think there'll be an efficiency gain there. That won't solve the problem completely. So take away some of the big frustrations and inefficiencies that work very well in the service.
Anything else before we move over to Kath performance? Okay, over to you, Kath.
So in terms of the financial position, as that one said, so we've got a very small negative variance in terms of the year-to-date position. The forecast does remain break-even. So you'll be familiar with the fact that we've got quite a number of pressures, both within GHT, pay, some non-pay, and also some slippage, which is causing quite a significant kind of financial pressure for the year end. We've also got other pressures within GHC, for example, it's got a growing and much more significant pressure around the health pieces materialised over the last few months, which is currently being explored as to why that is, as to whether it's kind of volume, cost, or share that would keep in health service. ICB has got a number of pressures. Those relate to ADHD and autism systems. Those have increased really very significantly over these the last few months. It's about 3.5 million. So it really has grown significantly. It's really not unique in numbers of the same impression. And also we've got growth in our independent sectors of client performance as well. Both of the last two, the ICB is taking steps to implement. So we have indicative activity plans for the majority of contracts, and we are implementing management plans associated with those. There's a timeline associated with that, so whilst we can bring some of that down, we can't mitigate all of that. We are working closely with the marketing regulators and providers to make time to manage that effectively. So as we've discussed previously, we've known that we've had a little pressure from quite an early part this year, and we've been taking steps in order to identify other areas of offset. Most of those are non-recurrent though in this financial year. We have a number of those sort of identified, and we have a number which are currently close to kind of hopefully realisable, but not quite there at the time. So we continue to forecast break even because we think we should have the route through to break even. Now the other, saying that, there's one other factor that's going to play into that, that's the ICB cost of exchange. So that's we've had this announcement around allocations of funding for across England, also a portion of that, and there's an expectation that the balance of that will be funded by the citizens. We're not sure where that lands at the moment. There's quite a lot of work to do just to empty the gap and to work out what that means for the financial position. So in terms of within this, there is a real focus on the underlying position. So we've had an underlying deficit position as a system in the way. We have, if we look at our run rates, we do have improvements in the run rates. So within GHT, there are improvements in the pay run rates as controls from the beginning of the year. As additional controls on top of those there, we started to make some changes. That's what we see. Things where we see savings, where we've had very positive operational changes. We are now getting to the point of saying, so how do we realise some of those savings that we use those were to maintain our underlying position and hopefully not worse into significantly. So there's a real focus on climate next year and starting to get those
that position into planning for next year and bringing forward any savings, motivation, which traditionally an area which is very volatile. And it's also spending some far this year. And the savings progress has been very, very positive. So particularly when you're in a demand position, that's going to help us in terms of volume effect into next year. Just to note, capital, we do have slippage on operation capital. Both trusts are forecasting to bring that back online by year end. You'll note in the previous report we said we had a contingency across the system. Both trusts confirmed that they did not want to access that. In September, we've been working with the region very closely as to how we can fully utilise that within the system. Some of those business cases are now with the region and about the national team in order to do that. There is a risk of overspend against just to note. And the final thing I just wanted to bring out of the cash. So we have some slippage around savings as a system, and also we've got measures that built up the year to date. That does mean that our cash position is slightly behind where we had to might be at this point in the year. GHFT are putting a request to the national team for cash to support the capital. So some of the capital that comes in the year is not cash backed. So therefore the national team is there's a request that's going behind the capital. It is anticipated that we should be back on track with the coming few months. And just linked to cash, note that the ICB letter payment policy is to be determined. We have a new ledger implemented from last October, along with the ICB and NHS England. That has come with a number of teething issues, and some of which are related to reporting, but it has also meant that some of the invoices, a number of invoices, are behind in terms of payments, and so our payment policy is not particularly going to be good. I mean, if you can't tell me what it is.
Thank you, Kath. Any of you got any questions?
Not such a question, but just a comment, really. And obviously, this is the focus of work on everybody's part as we go through the months. But cash is a particular issue which you alluded to, and it's something the trust has recently written to Jeff about, because I think it's a slightly different position than exists in some trusts. It's come about for a number of reasons, historical reasons, but I think it's something that we will need to keep focusing on. So just to mention that.
Thank you. So in summary, it's really tough, but working hard to actually deliver on our commitments to break even, but recognising the challenges that everybody in the system is facing to be able to do that. Thank you. And any other points? So I just want to double check. We've got Marie's laptop's doing a 4-step road any minute now, and so she's the exec lead for.
I'm here at the moment, Jane, but it said in 7 minutes, so it.
Oh, okay. So if you just go straight on to yeah. And then
and is in the room.
Potentially, Andy will be able to, but obviously,
yeah.
While you're here, great.
Yeah, I'll just introduce it and then Andy will go through the paper. So I just want to, so this is our annual assessment under the core assurance standards. I want to formally thank Andy. He knows I do in every meeting at the moment, but the work he's done, having been in the ICB just over a year, has been really amazing in the last year in terms of our position. So you'll read in the paper that our position has now seen a huge improvement in terms of the ICB being substantially compliant. It's worked really closely with our 2 trusts even though we had one member of the team and the team is 2 people. So Andy has been on his own, working and trying to support others. And I know, Kevin, certainly in your trust, you've had issues related to capacity in EPRR. In the paper, you'll see that there is a note around gaps in resource, and that was picked up by NHS England when we had the assurance, confirm and challenge meeting. But we have been working with local partners, particularly GHC, in terms of training all the people across the system. It was usually coordinated by our previous training and exercise manager, who did leave, with the other personnel from the other organisations, but we haven't been able to support that, but the other trusts have supported us in doing that, so thank you. And we are going to work really closely now with BNSSG in terms of what's the art of the possible across the two ICBs, particularly in terms of training. And you'll also note in the paper that we've talked about e-learning in terms of training, not everything being face-to-face. I'll stop there, and hopefully I'll be around for a few minutes while before it updates, but I'll hand over to Andy. So thank you, Andy.
Yes, thank you, Marie. So I just wanted to acknowledge the fact it's been a very challenging year, and NHS England also acknowledge that fact. In terms of incidents, we've had the January critical incident declaration, which is the first time we have a cloud as a system. We've had a backdrop of industrial action. We've had flooding. We've also had digital outages in the trust, which have affected system partners. So in terms of responses, it's been very challenging, and sort of to have across the system, you'll see the compliance ratings in the paper. I think it's testament to the hard work in EPRR that we haven't seen a deterioration in terms of our in terms of our rating. We were advised to receive substantially compliant. So Maria's already referenced the resourcing being challenged across the system, not just in the ICB. And the other, the kind of partially compliant or non-compliant areas in the system mainly relate to the age of the estates, fire safety, but also evacuation and shelter and lockdown. They're very difficult to achieve full compliance when you have an aging estate. So, as Marie discussed, we are working via SSG and through the local health science partnership to deliver that training and also support wider exercises. I should also note in the I mentioned all the incidents we've had. We also did the largest ever Tier 1 national exercise in exercise Pegasus, which is the pandemic response exercise. And we had the debrief for that maybe this morning, so we were really pleased to deliver that. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And I just wanted to add my thanks, because obviously this comes up through our reporting committee, and the change in a year in terms of the amount of work that you've led and done has been significant, and we see us in that substantial compliant box. I mean, with 50%, only you for most of that time has been phenomenal. So thank you from me. On behalf of the institution, I'm sure. So, anybody got any questions? Sure.
It's not a question, I'm adding my thanks, because I do think that it's a very underrated area of the business, but it's absolutely essential. It's only after an event that people go, oh, I'm really glad that we have some plans for that. And I just wanted to add my thanks from the Director of Public Health perspective for Andy volunteering to lead the Pegasus exercise. It wasn't a case of, everybody looking on the room and Andy was the last one standing. He actually actively put himself forward for this on top of everything else he's had going on. And I think it was a significant amount of work. And the system should be incredibly proud of the response it turned out, but in no small part to Andy's planning of that exercise. And just to repeat, it's the largest pandemic planning exercise the country's ever held. So thank you. And I think we had, as Andy said, we had debrief this morning, and I think we turned out some really good products of that. So, and then from the NHRP co-chair perspective, so the Local Health Resilience Partnership, I co-chair that with formerly Marie, now Raghu. it's been a delight to see Andy settle in Blossom and take the leadership in this space with colleagues. And I know Katie, my team, really values working with you as well. So thanks, Andy, for your leadership. I think it goes to show that leaders come at all levels of the organisation in making sure that we get to where we need to be to understand this. So thank you. So,
Yeah, it's a good example of this report of what we see a lot across our Gloucestershire system, which is really good joint working. So it's a pleasure. I was really pleased with Andy's report. This is congratulate our trust for keeping our head above water. And I think you can write that to many reports right now. So I'm just really pleased to see it.
I think the bar's much higher.
Anybody else have anything to say? Okay, well, I think thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next item. This is for approval. We've got the ICS wide overall escalation. We have these name back over, but is it you and Ravi? So I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, so thank you for making me as well. So to start by saying thank you to Yvonne and her team who have done huge amount of work on putting this policy together, and it's been through a range of different forums as well and iterated through that process. So recognising her work. I can't answer any of the questions. I'm sure Ragu will be able to, or I'll be able to take this back to Yvonne and answer them as well. So just to summarise, this is to present and ask for approval for the Gloucestershire system-wide escalation policy, which brings together a unified approach for managing operational pressures across the county, and is bringing together national, regional and locally developed framework. So just to draw out, we will take it as read. And as you'll gather, it's obviously an interactive document. It's meant to be very much a live document. So again, very happy if people want to take some more time afterwards and have any follow-up questions for myself or with either around after the meeting. But the key points really, this is revised and incorporating the 24-25 the revised 24-25 APA framework. And this now includes community mental health one-on-one standards in addition to the acute. And as a system, we have taken that one step further, and that's through the feedback that we had through our assurance process. So this includes for us open nature, which goes over and above. So we have an IECS open, which includes CAS as well as not just 111. And we also have the maintenance for the discharge framework as well, which again, we're very proud of that. Needs testing through, obviously, but it feels like a really important part of the document as we're testing through this winter. And this is really a policy articulates how the government's framework will work, and in feedback to the escalation policy that's been shared, we were asked to include and embed the community health response plan. So this shows how we move from escalation within the system into a more formal EPR instance. So hopefully that's drawn out in the document as well when we move from one of those from our local system escalation into more of an EPR instant and then back out of an instant as well. We held a winter stress test on Monday, and the outputs of that will be shared. And again, we had some really fantastic feedback from that, and we'll provide further update going forward. Those are things I just wanted to draw out, but I don't know if there's anything you need to add to answer questions.
Thank you, Jenna. And again, I'd like to thank you and her team for a phenomenal amount of work that's gone into it. But this has been a labour of love for a long time for me, and following the critical incident in January, we learned a lot of lessons, particularly where does EPR end, and what happens if something else happens at the same time. So there's three things I would say. One, this has been truly a system-wide input into it, and as Jen said, even I was there on Monday when we did the system stress test, and we tested different parts of the system, which took what could. The missing piece here, as always, in general practice, and part of what we're trying to do, and I met with the top of the LC for a long time, but what is it that we can understand as the pressure build up, by the time it gets to a full fall, it's probably too late. So can we do something much, much earlier as the system stabilizes? Those are the kind of things we're talking about now. And we're trying to implement it. It's not going to be perfect, but we'll continue to work on it to see how we can manage and mitigate the pressures before, during, and after and it's predictable the amount of system pressure. You can almost tell which week we're going to get into trouble. The other side, the second bit of this equation is it's about the risk thresholds, because we just get to make problems and issues, and the clinician, the individual registrant, is individually part of them to make different decisions. So part of the process is, well, we've set up a clinical advisory group that meets every week. We can set them up with evidence if we need to stop conditions from all the and clinical practice. So we can then start discussing what thresholds are and what we can differently. So we tested that during the what we thought would be a crisis in the fire that became an issue. So we could test language what we could do. So that would be a way by which the clinical oversight would be able to inform any changes that we do. That's not to bypass the system, but it's to give some early, immediate, reactive responses using the clinicians. And we were delighted to say that there have been a lot of support from colleagues across the project as well as the sector care. And the third piece of this equation is what do we learn from this? How do we do differently? So iteratively, since that January incident, since the other, we're just almost waiting for a blade notice to come next week to share what is it that we do differently, and we start keeping learning. It's certainly not a finished product, but we're excited to.
Thank you both. I've got a couple of questions, but I'm just going to open that first because you don't want to continue. Joe, Emma, I think you know to
I was just going to quickly say thank you to Radu for sharing the that document footage you had to. We did have a really helpful discussion. There isn't, as you said, there isn't an able type thing for general practice. There's something similar for GCAS, which is the general practice alert state. So actually looking at how we can interpret that, what's going on in general practice. And it really is for benefit of the wider system, because often the heat starts there, in those blue cases, COVID cases, before it reaches even other places. So I think it would be really helpful to be monitored. Thank you. Sort of minor comments and then a question. Minor comments is just thank you for putting with lots of it. As a non-NHS person, actually be able to know what all the question is really about true database and how accurate is that predicting. So you talk about it as something that enables proactive risk identification. So I just wondered how good is it for doing it?
I'll make an attempt. So as far as I'm aware, it updates on a very regular basis. So I think it's accurate in terms of what's happening in the system within 15 minutes. But I think there are other things that help us to predict, and other tools that are being used to help predict. So at the moment, I think some of the AI tools that are being used within the trust and some of the modelling data that we have on top of that that's pulling out is kind of giving us some of that predictive data that we're then using. And I know that has been, I think it's been described as freakishly accurate so far in terms of knowing what's coming. I think that's certainly what's been fed back from the trust. And so certainly through the TEG group, they're very much trying to ensure that they use Shrewd but other data sources to take a look back and then look forward to see, well, actually, can we predict, rather than wait until we're in crisis, rather than wait until we get to April 4, what are the proactive actions that we can take when we know that it's highly likely that we're going to see a surge coming? So already I know the conversations are happening today around us knowing when that next surge is going to hit and what we might do. So that was the question.
I'm not sure. It's the first thing I look up whenever I'm small and look back and see what's going on before I come in. There are two things. One is the immediate thing. What are we going to do? But part of what we want to do, and it's been picked up on Monday, is it's a two-way process. You look back over the last 2 weeks to see are like, and we can try and move forward with all the members that we have to see what's needed. So it is a tool, it gives us a view, but it is only part of a bigger process of how we will use that before the ocean develops. And sometimes I think what we're doing differently now is almost that maybe back and forth at the same time. So that then the recommendations come up to studio that, and if we need to set up a CAD or whatever, we can do that. But that's all really testing things and we'll tell you when we're just saying when we got to it.
Kevin, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of things, and the gentleman knows what I'm going to say. So the ICS exec, I think it's a really good framework. I think there is a risk that it becomes more of a governance conversation and an operational response conversation. And obviously those two things need to line up. And the reason I say that is because this time last year, when we looked back from the presidency, we looked back and we saw that in November, some lights on the dashboard started to flicker on the new weekends. And what we reflected on is in January, perhaps we should have taken different action. And that's where we are at the moment in terms of the lights changes. ERD, so discharge regulated patients, you know, have been stubbornly stuck for some time. Have actually gone up over the past period. That might be an impact of industrial action as sort of the senior clinical decision making around his back. Things like that. That's either way, we sort of stuck in that space. That's not to say the improvement we made as years has not been realised something because it made a massive difference. But I think there is something about confidence and assurance in the operation response now that we've in the framework, and how are we using that today in the things that we are dealing with today. You've heard me talk before, particularly about delayed limited harvest. The other element I think is really sort of telling for us as a not just as an assistant, but just as an NHS at the moment. When we look in the appendices, most of those relate to what happens at the front door of the hospital. And we know that is already too late when we get to that. That's not to say that the hospital doesn't have a big part to play in that. A year ago, for those maybe less familiar, back in the summer, a number of us were volunteered to join the regional ambulance handover group. And one of those was to deliver a timely handover protocol. And we've been able to do that. It's made a big difference in terms of that ambulance handover time and also contributes to ambulance response time. What we haven't done, I don't know if anyone in the region has done this, is held ourselves to the same standard when it comes to some of the other commitments that we need to make. We know will make a difference to patients. We know will contribute to a reduction in overheads and harm, and that can materially change something for in Gloucestershire. I really want us to do it. I also want to keep a promise to staff, which we said there'll be a suite of interventions that we make, one of which will be the handover protocol. I'd like us to deliver those. We're having discussions as a leadership team collectively with the ambulance service as well. But there's something for all of us still to hold ourselves to in that. And I think there's no reason why Gloucestershire can't be a bit of a beacon when it comes to what's happening in the space in the region, because we've made some really good inroads to it. But I just think we can go further. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, well, some of the points I was going to raise actually come up. So the two I was going to, for me, I mean, it is what it is, and it's the end of the framework, and it's well written and it's very clear. There was an absence of primary care in terms of what's the escalation, what's the framework around that. Then there's social care is doesn't really appear, and obviously I know social care is not governed in the same. It's not the same issue. It's much more difficult to do escalation in many ways, but you can't deliver this, and you can't deliver escalation, and you can't deliver the action without social care's involvement, or at least, whereas that is sometimes quite difficult to do at very short notice, it is really important when we look at predictive work that actually social care get the opportunity to be engaged and embedded and actually look at that. So that was the second thing. So really, I know it's hard. Many people have tried over many years to do it, but it would be really sensible to make just have something in there around what can the government do and what can social care do to support not only the patients or people in the patients, but people in their own homes that could be at risk of admission, but also around helping with the discharge. And we clearly have got a bit stuck with the discharge number, discharge rate number. So what else can we do to bring that down? But the overwhelming thing for me is about the predictive work. Yes, primary care is one of the really good places where you can start to predict what's happening. You'll get it through 111 calls as well. But the other thing is things like the weather and planning that. And it is highly, highly predictable in emergency care. So rather than waiting for us to get to over the 3 or 4, by which point it is actually, the escalation request is actually quite difficult to do much about. It's starting to work out what's coming. We know during my bad weather, that means 3 days later we're going to get an increase in admissions for MIs and COPD and stroke. That is well known. What can we do in advance to actually start preparing for that? And it would be, maybe I'm asking too much, but I'm worked around emergency care for more years than I care to remember. There is something highly predictable about it, and trying to do some work up front and sort of upstream before we get to implementing is key. Got to be one of the best things we can do to avoid another Christmas. So those are just my comments. The document itself is
Just to make the point, I suppose we need to be clear what this is and what this isn't.
yes.
It's kind of underlying your point. Is the escalation framework trying to say we need to do something different now, or we need to be aware that things are rising? I think what we, outside of this framework, but links to it, need to keep on looking on is the intelligence sharing about the areas that are therefore blocked, not working under pressure, because that helps make rapid decisions about what we then do. So sometimes the two things are quite interlinked, and we confuse the things that we're going to look at to think about escalation with things we need to know in terms of how we guide the response. And I think some of the comments made about care indicators and primary care indicators are useful for both understanding rising pressure, but also certainly understanding what is not worth doing is actually something kind of out of the picture in terms of that. So I think it's just keeping that in mind as we do things.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's this and means both happening. It's not criticising this in any shape or form. This is much more about we need to have this in place. But it's how what action do we need to take beforehand to predict or at least avoid some of that. Jo, did you want to respond?
Yeah, and this was exactly the conversation we were having just today on exactly this point. And I think what some of the teams reflect is that actually when we go into crisis, decisions miraculously can be taken sometimes that are quite tricky at other times. And so often teams reflect that. So we say, well, how do we then let's kind of get ourselves ready? So some of those might be clinical risk decisions. Some of those might be financial decisions. So how can we get ahead of that and just have those on the shelf? Also within that, so again, trying to make this as interactive as possible. So we can then say, we are starting to see it coming as the lights start to flicker. Actually, we have got that agreement clinically and financially to step into that space ahead of crisis. So it's always trying to get that, call to action that we always see in crisis and bringing it back. So that was exactly what the decision was.
The topic we have had in terms of sort of oversight that we have often place. And I just wanted to reflect that we've got really strong engagement from social care as part of that. We are tomorrow meeting to look at the metrics monitoring so that we can see those different elements absolutely to make sure that we are pinpointing and then able to take the right actions. So I think this is really helpful in terms of having that clarity of how we expect to work. But it is also the other stuff as well alongside.
So I think we're being asked to approve the escalation policy. So can I ask the board if it's happy to approve? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, done. Thank you very much. Thank you. And please pass on our thanks to Eve as well. Excellent. Okay, the next item is the joint review. I'm going to say I will get my ends confused. The Joint Remuneration Committee terms of reference. We have reviewed those and we've discussed it at the Transition Committee. Karen, you're down to update on that. Do you want? Is there anything? Would you like to just say anything before we ask for approval?
I don't think so. Hopefully the terms of reference is fairly self-explanatory. We took the opportunity to review how we ran each other's remuneration committees, compared terms of references, and looked to come up with something that reflected what both systems were looking for from their ICB remuneration committee. So I don't think there's hopefully nothing too controversial in there.
Thanks, and it makes absolute sense. This is one area where it really does make sense to do something collectively across both ICBs. So we've been asked to approve. So can we comments when we've still there prepared to approve it? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. All right, the last bit is really the updates on various different committees. You will have some. We've got some minutes in there, but it's verbal updates from other committee chairs. Julie, I know you're not well.
Yes, sorry.
If you feel better, can you do some? Can you talk about the System Quality Committee on the 22nd?
Yes, thank you. I think my body's sitting at my laptop, but my head is still on my pillow under the duvet. So apologies. In terms of the meeting on the 22nd, we looked at risk and the BAF, as you would expect, and need to consider as we go through each meeting any impact, if there is any, of the transition risks on quality. So that's something as a memo for going forward. Colleagues have already talked about the great work on the EPRR. So again, thanks to Andy and his team, in inverted commas, for doing fantastic work on that. We had very quick update reports from our provider colleagues, and we had a new attendee from Adult Social Care who was telling us about the new quality assurance team that's in place there, and they are aiming to have full functionality across the provider market by January. So that was good to hear. We made time in that meeting to have a discussion about how the work of the committee might move forward. This is something that Jane and Marie had kind of talked to me about for the meeting, to work towards the strategic work that the committee would need to be doing as we go forward. And so part one was really about having a high level overview from partners, with focused discussion really only on areas that needed system response or oversight, or have an impact on commissioning going forward. And then we talked about having a more informed update from System Quality Group, where most of the work is done, so that we're not duplicating, seeing the same papers in System Quality as we are in the committee, and to make use of work and discussions that have already taken place. And then to have room for a deep dive on topics that would have that kind of system view and system impact. So we made time for the discussion as to what some of those would be, and they've been sort of put forward for agreement by Jane and Marie and Raghu going forward as to which ones we have at which meetings. And then part three of the meeting would be business items, which would, we could cover fairly quickly. So the meeting was kind of a functional meeting, but also a forward look as to how we might begin to move things forward. Marie, I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that.
No, nothing, Julie. No, really, really good. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Have you got any questions? Okay, thank you, Julie. Sorry to you not there. Turn the camera off again now if you want to keep it there. Aisha, I know you're also not feeling great, but can you able to give us a further update on the PCDC?
I will. Dental surgery, but I was reflecting it's positive that I've got access to dentists. I know how challenging it can be, so can't complain. PCDC, we had you've obviously got the minutes from previous meeting, but the October meeting, which was on the 2nd of October, Haven't got minutes of those in the pack, so I'll just give a verbal update. We had some positive news around the Independent Prescribing Pathfinder programme, of which we at Gloucestershire ICB were already a part of, but NHS England have announced some extended funding to extend those Pathfinder programmes, going into new areas, etc. So we are going to be following that up and expressing interest in that. The National General Practice Pilot, we obviously, we're one of the ICBs that are part of this national pilot. So the updates come to PCDC. So we've got some sort of high level update, and it's really positive. What we heard was that Gloucestershire is kind of in the top out of the pilots in terms of some of the metrics and that sort of self-assessment data, the audit data that's been looked at, and the sort of PCN test sites. We've got 2. They're working really well. They're looking at digital tools, implementations, plans, etc. And the progress has been really, really positive. We had a bit of a deep dive about the 10-year plan and neighbourhood working, and in particular focused on what does this mean, obviously, for primary care. So hearing a bit about the new contracts for general practice and dentistry, sort of multi-neighbourhood provider contracts, and that our discussion was really saying that we need to make sure that our primary care relationships in Gloucestershire are positive, and that we continue to grow those and continue to develop the trust with our general practice and wider primary care colleagues to make sure we can really explore the opportunities in the 10-year plan, and that they are right for Gloucester, Gloucester, and that we're doing what's right for our population, for primary care and our services. Also making sure we're aligning with local government reform and engaging with the voluntary sector. So making sure that anything that comes from national policy really does align with what we're doing locally, and obviously aligning with our population health model. So quite a good discussion, getting an update, but also making sure that we do what's right for Gloucestershire. We also then had a bit of a deep dive about the GP patient survey. So this is a national survey that's sent out to general practice, and we heard the results and had a presentation from Becky about the Gloucestershire results. As usual, really strong response rate, which was higher than the national average. There's also been an improvement since last year in the positive experience that people in Gloucestershire have around NHS dentistry, although this is still below the national average. There's improvement in pharmacy experience since last year, which is matching the national average. And the GP overall experience patient experience has improved by 1% as well, again being above the national average. So the discussion, we talked a bit about variation between PCNs. So we know that some of this is reflecting, where there are inequalities in different parts of the county. We know that sometimes it can be difficult and have some PCNs will have sort of slightly lower satisfaction. So we know what the reasons for that are. So we're keeping a bit of a watching brief on that. And, we know that Becky shared with us the results being shared with practices, with patient participation groups. So this will be used to inform improvements in general practice. So positive discussion, still more to do, and plans are afoot to make sure we continue on that improvement trajectory compared to last year.
Lovely, thanks, Alicia. Anybody else got any? Do you want to assist them? Feeling really guilty now because I'm going to be really quick and I don't feel it at all. So everybody needs to say very much. A lot of our meeting was focused on planning, which is going to more in the confidential part of the discussion. We also had a deep dive into estates, and we had a detailed update on working as one and the family care and Thank you very much. Karen, People Committee.
Can I ask a question before I do People Committee? Is that okay? I think I noticed in the minutes of System Resources Committee the feedback on where we had got disparities in waiting times. and it was having a look at ethnicity, but also looking at gender. And I think it was reporting on 17 pathways, predominantly outpatients, where there was a statistically significant difference in wait times for men and women, and with women experiencing longer wait times. And this is a topic that I think we've come to multiple times since I've been in the ICB, but I'm just sitting at it thinking, is there an action plan? Are we satisfied that actually the reasons that the women were waiting longer are legitimate, or do we have an issue here that we need to do something about? So I don't know if I can just lodge that, please, because it's caused me discomfort a few times, and it doesn't seem to have moved unless I'm missing something.
Thanks, Carol. Really good points. Do you want to come back on that, or should we?
Yeah,
Have it an action.
I think it's a really good point. So yeah, so the analysis is one thing, but what action are we taking, Karen? I think it's your point. So when we dug into this a bit more, particularly working with GHFT colleagues and the team that support this work, a lot of the issues were actually around the timing of appointments, and particularly how those worked around childcare commitments. So the trust be taking action around that. The other big theme in terms of some of this was around access to transport. So there is a programme of work as part of the health inequalities framework commitments, Karen, and I can certainly share some more about that.
Thank you. That would be lovely. Thank you. Appreciated. On the People Committee, the meeting in October, which you haven't got the minutes for, the bulk of the matters we considered have been included in the People paper that Tracy went through earlier. So in particular, the Get Reading Working, the position on apprenticeships, and our people establishment versus our operational plan, and where we have got variance against that in bank and agency and so on, and the actions that are being taken across the system to address it. The one thing that we focused on in the meeting that we haven't covered today was we had a deep dive on the experience of our Black, Asian and ethnic minority colleagues across the system, where we noted that actually there was still little growth in band 8C and above amongst Black, Asian and ethnic minority clinical staff, and that the disparity in likelihood of being shortlisted, of entering disciplinary, and of experiencing bullying, harassment from colleagues and patients and families remained the same. So we hadn't managed to close that gap. We had really good presentations from the ICB, from GHFT and GHC on the actions that they were taking to address this, with really collaborative efforts to understand what everybody was doing and how we might share best practice. So that was excellent, and we are hoping that we will see some movement the next time we look at it. The one thing that we all felt we needed to do more work on, and Shane, if I can sort of lodge this somewhere with you for the moment, because I know it's also been discussed in the BNSSG People Committee, is how we tackle bullying and harassment from patients and family, where the consensus that we need to do more than have posters on the wall remains a very strong one, but there was no organisational consensus on what we should be doing, and nor had anybody found particularly good examples from anywhere in the country of an initiative that had worked. So there was a desire to do more on this and potentially reach out to colleagues in our new cluster to understand how we might tackle this together.
Thanks, Karen. Do you think we could suggest we put that down as an action we can take away and come back, because I think it would make a lot of sense. Thank you. Marie.
Yes, I just want to say, Karen, and I think I was at the meeting, but I probably didn't say this, so apologies, that Rosie, who's my opposite number in BNSSG, was leading a southwest piece of work, and I was leading one of the three areas. And then when all of the changes were announced, the work was paused sort of very on earlier in the year. Or before that, actually, probably February time. And we had to come together nationally across the systems, because this was being led both by chief people officers and by through chief nursing officers, with a focus obviously on nursing and midwifery. And there was a number of places, because myself and the person leading with me from the global majority, we picked up quite good examples from other areas in the country that had done some work. So interesting, only probably about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, we contacted each other and said, and NHS England, and said, right, what do we want to sort of re-energise that work? And I also had communication from GHC, actually chief people officer, to say there was a return that was needed to go in through NHS England. I think probably GHT have had to do it as well. So I think we just need to re-galvanise some of that work as well, and use the best practice that actually has worked elsewhere.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marie. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We've come to the end of the agenda, unless anybody's got any final comments. But can I just check, let's do any of the business and then last point, the end of the year.
I'm the lead for the Southwest for Health on EDI, and a conversation was soon to end last week about this, because where does this sit if we go forward? I actually think if we do appoint a regional chair, it's quite a good place to be looking across the whole landscape around EDI, and that might be all of the elements. Tracy Joliffe, who chairs the independent advice group for BNSSG, has done a piece of work around system-wide how we look at the agenda around equality, and myself and Shane are meeting with the regional mayor for WECA next week. I want to suggest to her that she should pick up the reins on some of this, where we come together collectively across public services, not just health, because I go to lots of things where we have the same conversation over and over and over. That's exactly what you just framed, Marie. So there's lots of good practice out there. There's huge amounts of people doing lots of good things. I think we could be a bit more coordinated and strategic in the way that we do it across the system. So the reason we sort of paused on the Southwest was around reorganisation. It just threw everything up in the air, and people were quite disoriented. I think we probably are calming down that now, and we can look at some really positive initiatives going forward, I think.
Thanks. Okay. Final point. Any of you got any other business that we might want to raise? Thank you, everybody, for contribution and discussions. That's the end of the public tours meeting, so we'll finish now, and